that you be led to the place from whence you came, and from thence to be drawn upon a hurdle to the place of execution, and then you shall be hanged by the neck, and, being alive, shall be cut down, and your privy members to be cut off, and your entrails to be taken out of your body, and, you living, the same to be burnt before your eyes, and your head to be cut off, your body to be divided into 4 quarters, and head and quarters to be disposed of at the pleasure of the King's Majesty. And the Lord have mercy on your soul.
This is all the work of the government at Oliver!
November the 7th, 1817. 3 men died on the scaffold outside Derby Jail, sentenced to death in accordance with the dictates of a savage medieval law. Jeremiah Brandreth, William Turner and Isaac Ludlam were found guilty of high treason. Yet they were not ambitious princes, defiant churchmen or regicides. They were a framework knitter, a quarryman and a stonemason. Their deaths were the strange and tragic culmination of the Pentrich Revolution. In the early years of the 19th century, Pentrich was a village of some 2,000 people. The Industrial Revolution brought pits, an ironworks and a canal, but many still worked the land and all suffered alike when the harvest failed. In 1815, the Tambora volcano blew apart in the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. The ash cloud blanketed, temperatures fell, and harvests failed worldwide for 2 years in succession. Food prices rose, and in the recession that came in the wake of the Napoleonic Wars, work was scarce. Unemployed soldiers added to the lines of the destitute, and with little to fall back on, save the meagre help offered by the parish, the poor began to starve. Unrest and discontent grew, but the government was in the hands of an aristocracy haunted by memories of the French Revolution, and more minded to crush dissent than to hear the grievances of the poor. Radicals across England began to organise. A Pentrich man, Thomas Bacon, travelled to reform meetings across the Midlands and North, and returned telling the villagers that insurrection and a march on London was planned. The government spies, who were many, heard these rumours, and the cabinet responded by suspending habeas corpus. This allowed imprisonment without trial. Meetings of over 50 people were banned. Fearing arrest, Bacon went to ground at Booth's Hovel and played no part in what was to follow. But the clock had been wound, and now 2 other figures came to the fore. One was Jeremiah Brandreth, a Nottingham captain, who was to lead the uprising. The other was William Richards, also known as Oliver the Spy. The government spies and informers within the reform movement targeted radicals for arrest, but Oliver was more than an informer, telling desperate, hungry men that only revolution could save them and inciting them to rise and march on Nottingham. He was aided by the impetuous, hot-headed Jeremiah Brandreth, who arrived in Pentrich on June the 5th. On the night of the 9th of June, the would-be revolutionaries assembled at Hunt's Barn in South Wingfield, and armed with a few shotguns and pikes, set off in 2 groups. Brandreth promised that thousands were waiting to join them and overthrow the government, and every man would receive 100 guineas, bread, beef and ale. Things went wrong almost at once. As they knocked on farm doors, trying to collect more men and arms, they met resistance. Some argued, some made excuses, others hid.
What do you mean by disturbing us at this time of night?
We mean no trouble, Mrs. Hepworth, but we need your barn cart.
No. We want no part of your treason.
We will take it!
We will take it from you!
We want no part
Come on,
of it.
Mrs.
It's
Hepworth.
treason.
Our cause is righteous, Mrs. Hepworth!
In an argument with widow Hepworth, her servant Robert Walters was shot and killed, the only fatality of the night. Their most decisive failure was at the Butley Ironworks, where they hoped for arms and cannon shot. They were met with blank refusal. The Butley men stood their ground, and they left empty-handed.
I am the Nottingham captain! You men will stand down! I will have your men and all of your arms! You'll all be hung!
With rain falling fast and the men drifting away into the night, the diminishing band of insurgents called at 3 pubs, promising to pay for their drinks once the government had fallen. Cold, wet and demoralised, a small group made it over the Nottinghamshire border, only to be confronted by a company of the King's Hussars. Most fled, some were arrested. The Pentrich Revolution was over. Retribution was severe, though many of the chief instigators hid. All were eventually captured, with rewards of up to 100 guineas being offered, this a life-changing sum for poor people. A show trial followed, fearing that Oliver's role as an agent provocateur would be revealed, and behind him the hand of the government. The cabinet censored the press and ensured that the defence did not ask any awkward questions.
Please, I beg of you, show us mercy. We meant no harm. Please. We meant no harm.
The verdict was a formality. The sentence is barbaric. Brandreth, Turner and Ludlam were convicted of high treason and sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered, the last men in Britain to be condemned to such a death, though the sentence was commuted to hanging and beheading. 14 others were sentenced to transportation to Australia and 19 were jailed. Yet the government did not have everything its own way. Unease over the role of Oliver and the death sentences led to many, such as the poet Shelley, protesting against the conduct of the authorities. But in spite of the protests, the authorities in the Pentrich area took no chances. The homes of many of those involved in the revolution were demolished and their land given to loyal tenants. The village itself declined in importance as a result. The census of 1831 revealed that the population had declined by 1/3. The families of the revolutionaries lived under a cloud, their forebears seen as criminals, a disgrace to the village, not to be spoken of. But in time, those views have changed. From this distance, it is now hard to see those desperate men of 2 centuries ago as serious revolutionaries. The rising that never quite was ended tragically, but the impulse for justice was not killed. The Pentrich revolutionaries achieved little except their own defeat, but the broader movement for reform went on. 15 years after they failed to achieve change through force, the Great Reform Bill was passed and the march towards full democracy began. The memories of injustices like Pentrich helped spur it on. Perhaps the dead men had not died in vain.